digitaljamsessions.com.
Hello and welcome to this Digital Jam session. We're coming at you live from PocketGamer in London, and today we are joined by the lovely Jess Hyder from Epic Games. We have the lovely Liam back from Rift, and we have with us once again Kate Edwards, who is now with Geogrify. Welcome back, everybody.
Hello. Thank you.
Would you care to explain very briefly for our lovely listeners exactly who you are and what you do? And I'm going to start with you, Kate, because you've changed.
Okay, so I am actually the former executive director of the International Game Developers Association. And after I left in mid-2017, I went back to my consulting work, which I do culturalization for game content, something I've done for almost 25 years. And I'm also doing a lot of advocacy work in the industry, so still being outspoken about a lot of things that need to change.
Wonderful, thank you. And Jess, why don't you tell us all about what you do for Epic?
Sure. So I'm the European Community Manager for Unreal Engine. So I work with all the developers in Europe who use Unreal Engine in whatever form or capacity that they need.
Wonderful. Liam, tell us all about Rift.
Okay, so yes, I'm Liam Dow of Rift Group, the business development lead. So pretty much I go out and meet lovely people that want to get to video games tax relief or research and development tax relief. And also if they want to talk about investment and grants.
So basically you're the money.
The money. That's what I keep getting told.
Okay, so we're here this week at PocketGamer, and as always, there are lots and lots of people talking about all sorts of different things to do with the industry. But given that we have this wonderful array of people here, I thought we could have a little bit of a discussion about perhaps the range of diversity that we are seeing in some of the conversations on the stages, because I am aware that there might be the occasional panel or stage where there's not a huge amount of diversity. And I'm going to start with you, Kate, just because I think you're probably the most well-spoken when it comes to this particular topic.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously the game industry has a diversity issue. I mean, and it's no different from the IT sector. I mean, some would say that the game industry is slightly better than the general IT sector, which tends to be 10 to 15% women. Just to use that as one example of diversity, whereas the game industry tends to be more around 20%. And but generally speaking, I mean, underrepresentation of certain people, whether it's people of color, whether it's different gender, whatever, remains an issue in the industry. And you know, there's a lot of companies that are starting to get the message. They realize it's an issue in the social consciousness that they need to address. But honestly, I haven't seen a lot of them take really vigorous, actual steps to change it. I mean, they're addressing it, they've got policies around it, but it really comes down to, you can have a policy about diversity, like, yes, we're a diverse company, we believe in it, but what do you actually do? And sometimes that does not translate to hiring practices. They don't address things like unconscious bias that happens in the hiring process, for example. They often don't even know where to look for people of color or, you know, or women or others to work in their company. And they'll say, well, there's no qualified women candidates. We can't find them, you know? And like, I've had to remind some hiring managers, like, we got to remember, like, one of the unfortunate side effects of something like Gamergate is that a lot of us in the industry, we went underground. So we created secret groups that's women only, because they're safe spaces where we can talk about our careers and everything without having repercussions. And so basically companies, I think the general awareness of what diversity is and the importance of it is there, but I still think they have a long way to go to realize what that actually means in practice.
It's interesting that you say this in terms of the idea of groups that have kind of withdrawn from the public eye, so to speak, because I'm kind of going to throw this curveball at you, Jess, but I do feel like we're at this current cultural phase where people are a little bit more willing to talk, a little bit more willing to kind of step out from behind the shadow of some of where these groups have ended up having to be more private. And with things like the Me Too campaign, things like the, you know, Time's Up campaign, all of these other kind of comments that we're starting to see, whilst there's a lot of media focus on this within the film industry and the TV industry, we haven't really had too much of this yet within the games industry. And I'm curious from your perspective as somebody who is of a gender that may be considered as slightly less prevalent in this industry. You know, what is your sentiment? Have you heard any kind of sentiment around that?
So I think we all know people that have been through things. And it's one of the things I think, in some degree, I think we probably all experienced it ourselves. You look at other people's experiences and you go, you know, thankfully that's never happened to me. And sometimes I think depending on where you work here in the UK, from what I've seen and from what I've heard, in a lot of ways, we're a little bit further ahead in not having to deal with this, and people being more open-minded and being more accepting and tolerant compared to other industries from around the world. So I don't think we've necessarily seen the big kind of spread that came through from actresses and stuff. And I was reading actually a couple of posts about all of this. And one of the points that I read about was, well, movies need actresses. They need female roles. They need female actresses at some point. So in some ways, their jobs are still safe if they speak out about it, because there's always still going to be a need for females to play parts. Whereas if you're in a back-end environment where actually it doesn't matter who's making the thing in the end, maybe if you speak out about it, maybe there isn't that same job security. Now, of course, you can't say if it will go one way or another because you don't know, but maybe that's the reason why we haven't seen it come out, because people don't necessarily feel like they have that freedom and stability to be able to do so yet.
Interesting point. I find it quite interesting because one of the things that I'm aware of, and I am actually going to name names because I think it's worth naming the individuals in question. But I know that Bertie from Virtual Umbrella, for example, actually put out a request to replace himself on the panel that he was supposed to be on here at PocketGamer, to replace himself with a woman, because he felt that the panel was all guys, and he said, there's no reason for me to be on this panel too. I think we should get women as well. And I'm kind of curious from your perspective, Liam, whether you feel that there is too much focus even on this idea and notion of having a balance within these discussions, or, in terms of what's being visually seen on a stage versus actually just somebody who's damn good at their job and has the knowledge sitting on the stage.
I have to be careful here because I'm the token white male on this panel, so I have to be careful where I step. But I think it is as well. I think there is a problem where once you start solidifying it down into gender or race or disability or anything like that, you kind of muddy the waters of, is this person actually right for what they are doing? And I think that needs to come first. And the more we start thinking about, we have to get more people of a different gender or a different race or possibly disabilities, you're creating a problem where you are becoming the problem, because you are so worried about offending others that you're not thinking about the first thing of, is this person actually right for the role? And that's what matters more than anything, really.
I think this is really interesting because one of the other issues I feel is a bit of a problem when people say, there isn't anybody qualified to speak on this panel, as Kate mentioned, is actually sometimes it's more a case of that person isn't comfortable speaking on a stage because they don't get asked often enough to speak on the stage.
So I've got a point. So I helped put together a panel, I won't say where, and we didn't realise it until everyone was sat up there and it was all white males of a certain age. But the thing was, as a female, I put people forward, and my view of looking at it wasn't looking at it from race or gender, which maybe I should have been taking into account more consciously. It was looking at it from a spectrum of, well, this person is a AAA developer, this person's an indie developer, this person is coming from a hobbyist move and they've moved across, or this person's gone from AAA to indie. And it was balancing it around the topic of the experiences that they'd had. But yes, it was one of those things when you do see it, you do kind of also sit there and go, oops.
I do want to raise something that's a little bit out of the box, I suppose, here. I take it all the three of you have heard about the problem that H&M had recently with the hoodie and the young child of Black origin. We came to the discussion in our office about this, and we actually said the person who modelled that piece of clothing on that child is the most non-racist out of everybody, because they didn't even make that connection in the first place. They just saw a child and put a hoodie on them. And that's, they're the best person out of all of them. It's the people jumping to conclusions going, this is terrible. They're the ones that are actually triggered in their mind that there's a race problem here, which is not.
Well, one of the things I want to mention, though, that I think is important is that I agree. I mean, and you ask any woman or any person of color, do you want to get hired for your gender or your color? No. Nobody wants to be hired for that. You want to be hired for who you are as your skills. You want to be hired for what you can do. And I think that's clearly universal. But what we often encountered, and I'll give an example. So unconscious bias is a very strong force that happens in any industry. It happens a lot in IT and games. So I had a conversation recently with a hiring manager at a company. So I did the comparison game. So let's have a hypothetical, 2 resumes on the table, 1 man, 1 woman. They're pretty much equal in all their skill sets. So I'm like, who are you going to hire? And his response was, I will very likely hire the man. And I'm like, why? And he says, because I have an all-male team. If I hired that woman onto my all-male team, that could be disruptive to the environment. And I'm like, well, there are many studies that prove exactly the opposite of what you're saying, that actually you add one woman to an all-male environment and their production gets better. They kind of clean up their act a bit.
Yes.
There's all of these anthropological cues that kick in just because we're human beings. And I mean, I've talked to companies that did that, and they said, well, yeah, it's weird because the kitchen was like cleaner than it used to be. And right. And they'll say, like, even stuff like some of the guys will use less profanity, even if she's dropping F-bombs every other word. It's just it's like they just kind of have this discomfort about being like the douchebag in front of this woman.
Yeah.
And
right,
exactly. And so, but that's a great example of unconscious bias. This hiring manager just has his own belief that it's disruptive where it's actually not true. And so what I think that leads us to do at certain times is, like the US went through this big wave of dismantling federal affirmative action, which is exactly what you were describing earlier, where you basically go out for quotas.
Yes.
We must have one disabled person, 3 Black people. Yeah. And, I think most companies came to the realization, well, that we don't want quotas. But so if in the absence of quotas, though, how do you get the representation? And I think that's why in the last several years, you've seen Facebook and Google and others spend a lot of time focusing on the unconscious bias issue, because they're like, we know the talent is out there, even though there is another issue around that as well. Like, we know for a fact there's not as many women doing engineering, and we're trying very hard to get more STEM programs out there. But when you do have qualified talent, how do they actually enter the recruiting pool and get through the process in a way? Because, a lot of men are socialized to put themselves out there and to use bravado to say, well, look what I can do. Whereas women are often socialized to do exactly the opposite, be more diminutive and quiet about their skills.
If a woman does do that and is forthright about their abilities, they tend to get looked down on in terms of you're too bolshy.
Yeah, too much.
Yes.
Which is wrong. Everyone should be equal in that sense. If you put yourself out there, geez, yeah. I mean, also the thing is, I come from 2 different worlds here as well. Coming from the finance background, that is so dominated by white older males. I'm quite lucky that my team, although we're a small team, both our managers, head of department, plus our ops manager, both female. There's only 2 guys in our team, which is unheard of, which for us is brilliant. Myself and the technical lead that I work with, you're exactly right. We keep our tongue in check. We make sure things are tidy. It's like working with our family, like mums in some ways, but it does keep us in check. And it's true, it works.
Yeah. It's interesting, though, because one of the things that Kate was talking there about was the unconscious bias. And I do think it's one of those things that needs to be discussed a little bit more, just generalistically, in the context of the industries that we work within, because not enough people really get it or understand exactly what the impact of this unconscious bias is. And I'm just going to kind of reiterate this example. If somebody wants to, YouTube this, you can go and search on YouTube for this. I'm sure it's there somewhere. But there was an exercise that somebody kind of asked people to do, which was to write down a list of 10 names of people that you consider as close friends, or people that are not family but very, very close friends. And then on the right-hand side, to draw up a list of columns. And those columns have things like, age, gender, education, race, those types of things. And then once you've written down these 10 names of these people that to fill in the rest of those columns, and then to look at what you've actually put. And what most people find is that the majority of those 10 names are people who either reflect them or reflect that group. So there's very, very few people who, for example, if you are of an age of maybe, say, for example, 25, you probably don't have many people in your top 10 people that who are over the age of 65. For example, who you consider as just a friend. In the same way that, you tend to hang with mostly the same gender, mostly the same educational level, etc., and so forth. And that's an output of unconscious bias, that people aren't even aware that they're doing that they're naturally gravitating towards people that reflect them, their values, their education level, etc., and so forth.
Well, that's why I think there's a healthy way to implement some form of affirmative action. I'm not saying quotas, but I'm saying what I've often encouraged developers to do, or people in the game industry and elsewhere, is to be conscious of it. That to me is affirmative action. It's not that you're selecting for quota. It's that you are examining your own thought process when you do have 2 equal resumes on the table of different gender or whatever. and just think about it for a second. It's like you can make the choice for diversifying your company. It's like, okay, so the hiring decision came down to gender. But if they're all being equal and both are qualified, you feel, for the job, I often encourage them, go for the underrepresented person because the industry needs it. But the other issue too is that we're at a stage of this industry, in particular in the game industry, where we absolutely need role models. We need role models for kids to look up to and to follow, because I cannot count how many times, especially when I've traveled to emerging markets and have visited and given talks and whatnot, or even like the inner city of larger cities in the US, you'll meet kids who are of underrepresented groups. They're just, I never knew that I could even do that. Because, when I see pictures of game developers, that I don't see a single person that looks like me. And that matters. It really does matter. And so, like, in that example, like with the manager who said he would pick the guy over the woman, I said, well, though, that a lot of women, if we know there's no women at that company, that alone might make us reticent to join the company. Because, are we prepared to be, for lack of a better comparison, are we ready to be the Rosa Parks of our era of a woman in the game industry? Are we ready to serve that role? Because we will be serving that role to some degree. So, and that's not for everyone. Not everyone wants to sign up to be kind of a implicit social activist when all they want to do is be a programmer or whatever. But it kind of comes with the territory. So it's like, I think it's important that, they realize that could be, at least now at this phase of the industry, they could be stepping into that role. And are they ready for it?
Ooh, a lot of responsibility there. So, on a more light-hearted note, as always, we love to give our listeners a way to find out a little bit more about you. We ask you to do that by sharing with us your social media handle of choice. What would that be?
So on Twitter, you can find me at Jess Hyder.
Thank you.
On Twitter, it's at RiftBDM.
Thank you.
And Twitter, it's Geogrify, which is GeoGrify.
Wonderful. And thank you for listening. If you enjoy this content, don't forget to subscribe and review. You've been listening to the Digital Jam session live at PocketGamer London. Thinking of starting your own podcast? Why not speak to the GL Pro UK team? They handle all of our podcasting service needs. Tell them that Digital Jam session sent you and you'll get 10% off your first order. Find out more at www.glpro.co.uk. digitaljamsessions.com